G'day guys and welcome back to my lab and to our series called Zero to Zelda, How to Make an ARPG in Godot 4. So this is our 7th lesson. If you've been following along, hopefully your game looks a little something like this. So we've got our player who is animated, we've got our enemy who has its defined territory and is also animated. And what we're going to get onto today, well, by the end of this lesson, your game will hopefully look something like this. So a quick recap on what we've been up to so far. Well, we've set up our project, we've created our world scene, we've created our tile map, created our player scene, animated our player, we've scripted our player's movement, we've set up our layers and collisions, and we've created our enemy. So we've done quite a lot already, but what we're going to do today, well, we're going to start work on our combat system. We won't get it all done today, there's not quite enough time, but we're going to have a good crack at getting it started so we start to see how our player and our enemy are going to interact in that way. Why? Well, our why is almost always the same thing, isn't it? We want to make our game more engaging and we want to make it more challenging. So by implementing some good combat systems, we can make sure people actually, well, hopefully enjoy playing our game. What skills will you need today? Well, you're going to need to be able to understand and apply how to use a few different things, but we're going to go through them all together. So we're going to need to be able to use our Area 2D, Collision Shape 2D, which we've already had a play with, layers and masks, we've already been introduced to those, signaling and nodes. We're going to introduce you to signaling. You already are familiar a little bit with nodes, and of course GD script, which we've been coding in so far. So you've sort of got a lot of the skills already, but we're just going to apply them in slightly different ways. And what does success look like today? Well, hopefully by the end of the lesson, you will have an enemy that can detect and attack your player. There are quite a few things we need to get done in this lesson, so I'm going to break them down as best I can into smaller chunks and I'll just stitch them all together, and that way it might make it easier for you to rewind and things like that. So first thing we want to do is have our player scene open as I've got here, and what we are going to do is add an Area 2D to our player. So we come up to our player node at the top, we right click, we add child node, and we want to look for an Area 2D. We hit enter on that, that creates this Area 2D. Now an Area 2D doesn't have its own shape. It's kind of the node that allows us to put other shapes in there, and we can use the area to sort of communicate with different aspects of our game. So we're going to need to add a shape, so a collision shape 2D, which we've used before, to our Area 2D. So we want it to be a child of the Area 2D node, not a child of the player node, if that makes sense. And it was a collision shape, so we type that in. There we go, collision shape 2D, and it is a child of our Area 2D. Now, if you recall, when we make a collision shape, we still need to physically make the shape. So we go across to our inspector and we click on the shape where it says empty, and then it gives us some options. And for this one, we're going to use a circle. So what this particular shape is going to be is our player's hitbox, basically. So we need some way of the game knowing when our player is getting attacked and when maybe the enemy is attacking, but they're not touching, if that makes sense. So our hitbox is kind of the thing we're going to use so that our game knows that we are being hit. So we want it to be only, roughly the shape of our person. Maybe bring that in a little bit, something like that. And what I want to do as well, like we have done with some of these other ones, I want to rename our Area 2D to be hitbox. Okay, so that's all I want to do in the player scene. So let's Control S and save it. Now I want you to go to the magpie scene, and we're going to do the exact same thing, but instead of calling it hitbox, we're going to call it magpie _ hitbox. So we go up, we right click on magpie, we add a child node, we search for Area 2D, we rename it to magpie _ hitbox, and then we add a child node for our hitbox, call it collision shape, or it's a collision shape 2D. We make our collision shape 2D, again a circle, bring it in so it's just sort of the wings and that's going to be the hitbox for our player. For our enemy. So there we go. We've made a hitbox for our player, a hitbox for our enemy. Save that. Next, we're going to create a new Area 2D for our magpie, And this one is going to be our territory. So remember I said that magpies tend to have their own sort of territory and whatnot. We've set up so it can fly around the entire map at the moment. But what I want it to be able to do is when it senses the player nearby, it turns and attacks it. So we're going to make another Area 2D child node of the magpie root node. So it's not a child of the magpie hitbox, it's a child of the magpie. We're going to call this one territory, and then we are again going to create a child node which is a collision shape, and this one will be a circle again, but we want this to be a lot larger. So think about this as being the area that our magpie, when it sees our player, will turn and chase. So our player needs to avoid this large circle around the magpie if it doesn't want to go near it, because if you touch that, the magpie is going to turn to face you and start flying at you. So let's save that. That'll do for this portion. Next thing, we're going to do some coding. So let's jump over into our scripts menu. So this is our magpie script at the moment as it stands. We haven't added anything to it yet in this lesson, but there are a lot of changes we're going to need to introduce, because we're going to enable a swoop function for our magpie. So when it detects the player in that large circle, it turns and flies fast towards the player, just like a magpie would do if it detected you in its nesting area. It's going to turn towards you and attack. So we're going to introduce that, and we also need to play around with some things that we call signals, and that can be a bit weird. I'm going to say weird because it's a weird thing where we've got to do some clicking and stuff, and I generally prefer just typing. So try and follow with me as we do it. I'll do my very best to explain it, but as with anything, if you are struggling, rewind, watch it again, and if that still doesn't help, just ask. I'm always happy to help. So the first thing I want to do is add a bunch of new variables to our magpie. So at the moment, we've got this variable called speed, which, great. We all want to be able to set a speed for our magpie, but I also want to set a new speed variable, which is for when it swoops. So I'm going to create a new variable here, and I am going to call it swoop speed, and I'm going to make that equal to 75. So it's half as much again as what our normal speed is, but our player should still hopefully be able to run away. We don't want to make it too hard just yet. So we're going to add that one in. We also are going to want to add in a variable that is just called swoop, and we're going to make that equal to false. So what this is going to do, this is going to identify whether the magpie is currently swooping or not. And we will change this from true to false depending on the situation. So we need to introduce a variable for that. We're calling it swoop because it's a magpie and it swoops you. All right, what else do we want to get in there? We probably need to have it understand whether there is a player in range. So we're going to set this one as null as opposed to false. I want another one called variable, and we're going to call this one player in range. And this one can also be false. So player in range is going to be all attached to that swooping and everything. Is the player in range? If it is, do that. So we need a variable for that as well. All right, so we've added in 4 new variables. Actually, you know what? I'm going to move that one down. Just so you know it's a bit more sequential. We're adding them in one at a time. So our 4 new variables are these 4 here. So make sure you get those ones written down. Remember, we're in our magpie script, so right up the top where we've got those variables, there's 4 new ones for you to type in. And I think I'm going to save that as we've done it now, and then we will do the next bit afterwards, just chopping it up as much as I can so that we can make sure you can rewind and fast forward. All right, so the next thing I want to do is mess around with those signals that I was talking about. If we click on our magpie hitbox in the left-hand scene column there, it brings up our inspector, right? Now, you might remember from our very first episode, I said there was also a menu up there that had node written above it. If you click on the node one, suddenly you get all of these signals that we can play around with. And when we made those area 2Ds, it gave us a lot more options here. And what we want to do is we want to use our territory area 2D and our magpie hitbox area 2D. And what we're going to do is we're going to signal those areas back to this script. And it sounds a bit confusing. I'm sure I'm not explaining it particularly well, but if I just move down here, so you see right now, line 68, line 69, there's nothing there at present, okay? I've got my magpie hitbox selected. I come over here, and what I want to do is I want to have body entered and body exited signaled to the magpie script. So if I double click on body entered, it brings up this little connector signal to a method, and I'm going to have magpie selected as the root node, and I'm going to hit connect. Now what you will see is that then adds in some lines of code to our script, and you see this little green icon there. That's telling me that it's a signal that's connected. We want to do a few more of these though, so I'm going to hit enter. We want to also do body exited. Again, magpie, click connect. But that's not all. We also have our territory. So I want to click on the territory one on the left hand side now, and then do the exact same thing with our signals. Body entered, connect, body exited, connect. So we've now got these 4 new functions here. All of them say pass, which is just basically ignoring it for now. But we've created all those signals which then put these functions in. We're now going to save our magpie script. Actually, one more thing we'll do. I want to zoom back up to our function ready, and I want to add something in here that's going to make our lives easier. So we're going to have more than just one enemy, right? And I don't want our player script to have a bunch of stuff in there that is all specific to different enemies. What we can do is we can create a group called enemy, and if we put all of our enemies in that group, then all we need to do with our player is sort of check to see if they're in the enemy group. So we're going to add that in here, and it's really, really easy. So I'm in our function ready, and if you remember, this was our setup bit of code, and then our physics process is like our loop. So we want to set it up so when the magpie instance is first created in our scene, it should run this add to group. Ooh, helps if you can spell and type, doesn't it? Add to group, and we're going to call it enemy. All right, and that's it. That's literally all you have to do there. So we've added in this line add to group enemy in our ready, and down the bottom we did all those signals. So you should see them there with the green next to them and things like that. Hopefully you've managed to follow that along. I'll stop this video now, save it, then you can rewind and make sure you get all those bits done correctly. And the next thing we're going to do, I think we'll jump over to our player and add it to a group and signal its area 2D as well. Alright, so I've moved to my player script. I've also got the player scene selected at the top because I'm going to be using the player hitbox that we set up before. First thing we should do, let's do that add to group for our player. So I come down to our players ready function, and we just do the exact same thing, but instead of adding it to the group called enemy, oh, I did the exact same thing, a massive typos. Add to group, and this time we're going to call it player. So, ooh, I'm not having a good typing day. So we'll call this one player, save that. Now we're going to do the same thing we did with the magpie with the signal. So I've got hitbox selected on the left, then we go over to our signal area on the right. So we've got our area 2D, body entered to the player one, connect, and body exited to the player, connect. And the exact same thing happens. It puts this bit of code in, and then it connects those signals. Excellent. All right, we've done a bunch of code. We still have some more to do. Let's just take a moment out from the code to set up a few other things. So what I want to do now, I'm still in my player scene. I've got my hitbox selected still. I want to go back to our inspector on the right-hand side. And I want to select my hitbox. So I've got the hitbox picked over here. I've got my inspector over here. Remember, we're in the player, so it's not the magpie hitbox. It's just hitbox, and it's the player. What I want us to do is go to our collision menu and add mask 2. So still leave it layer 1, mask 1, and add in mask 2 for the hitbox. Save that. And let's go to our magpie scene now. Let's go to our magpie hitbox, and let's have a look at our collision layers here. So at the moment our collision layers are both on 1. We actually want to change that to being on 2 and save that. And then we want to go to our territory, and our territory is a bit different. I'm actually going to leave this on 1, and hopefully that'll make sense later on. But the territory one is just for deciding whether or not the player is in zone and then zooming towards it. So we can leave that on 1. Save that, save everything, and now we're going to do a little bit more work on our Magpie script. All right, now I want to play around a little bit with the actual swoop towards the player. So in your Magpie script, go to your physics process function. And what we want to do is we're going to actually copy in a few lines of code at the very, very start of it. We're going to add an if statement, and then the rest of it will become an else statement. So we're just going to check and see if this is happening. Otherwise, we'll do something else. So in terms of the code that we want to add in, I will just paste it in there now. Oops, better sort out tabs and things. That'll need to go across like that. All right, so we copied in these lines and then we had to tab that one over one more line, okay? So when we first do it, the direction is there like that, but because now it's a subordinate to that else statement, we just got to send it across one more line. So let's just read from the top. If swoop. So remember we added in swoop up here. Swoop equals false, so we're saying if swoop, so if it's positive, if it's true, then what we want to do is we want to set our direction to player to equal the player's position, take away our position. So that's just sort of saying flip around so you're facing the player. And then we've got a little bit more information about how we get there and the speed and things like that. Otherwise, so the else, so okay, so we've gone if swoop, do this. Otherwise, else, so if it's not swooping, if swooping is false, then we do the normal stuff that we've always been doing. But if we are swooping, then we want to do this instead. So that's what that little bit of code does. Now we're going to scroll down the bottom and we're going to do something to these territories down here. So these were the things that we've just put in a little while ago. But what we want to do here is grab a couple of lines of code and I'm going to replace them. So these territories, the territory box, if you recall, is the one that detects whether the player is near us or not. So I'm just going to replace these, then we'll talk through what we've got. So, all right, on territory body entered, we want to set our player to equal body and swoop to equal true. So if you're wondering, well, how does swoop ever be true? Well, this is how we do it. If our player enters this area that we set up, then we're going to change the swoop variable to be true, which of course then makes this bit of code work. But if the player then leaves it again, then we're going to set swoop back to false. Okay, now this will give us a few animation errors. I'm not worried about that at the moment. We can fix all those things down the track. But that should hopefully get our Magpie turning and heading towards our player when our player enters that territory area. So I'm going to save that and then we'll jump into the game and see if it's working. All right, so before I press play on this, have a look at the screen and you'll start to understand what we're talking about when we talk about those territories. So you can actually see those collision shapes here, right? So the Magpie is set to whenever you enter that circle to turn and face you and fly towards you. So the goal then would be for the plate. Now those won't be visible when you're actually playing. We can turn them on if we want to for debug purposes, but we don't need to do that at the moment. So what I want to do is press play and we're just going to make sure, remember I said there will be animation issues, so don't worry if it's flying backwards or whatever, we'll sort that out later. I just want to make sure that when we get near a Magpie, it tries to fly towards us. So let's go up the top and hit on play. I can actually press it. There we go. And there you go. The first thing he does is fly towards me. Let's see if that works for all of them. This guy looks like he's trying to run away from me. Oh, there we go. So we still have a lot of animation issues flying backwards and things, but you can actually see that when I enter the area, it comes towards me, but when I exit, it turns around and flies off by itself. So I'll come up here and get near this one, then it wants to follow me, but I get away and it flies away. So that's working perfectly. I was hoping to fix those animations and a few other things in this lesson, but I think it's getting a bit long and there's still a lot of things for you to fiddle around with and test and play with. So I think we're going to end it there for today. And in our next lesson, we'll have a look at some of those other things as well. And your must-may might for this lesson, well, you need to get that swooping sorted out with your area 2Ds and signaling and things like that. You may like to experiment with some of the values. So, you know, we've got our Magpie's normal speed and its swooping speed, and we've got our player player's speed, start messing around with those. See if you can tweak them in ways that make your game a bit more interesting for you. And you might like to consider how we will animate that magpie. I wanted to get to it today. We haven't got enough time, but we can get our animation to change when we are attacking our player. And we're going to do it all in code, plus we'll have to set up that particular animation. Have a think about how we might do that, and you might get a head start on us for next week. Great job today, guys. Hopefully you got your magpie to start swooping your player, and you've also set up our hitboxes on our player and our magpie. Well, next time we'll get to those few things we didn't get to today, like the animations, but we'll also introduce a cooldown timer. We don't want our player and our enemy to just go dead. We want to have some sort of regulation about how quickly they can hit each other. And hopefully we'll also have a chance to get our health started in our next lesson. And the quote I'd like to leave you with today is from a little known but incredibly amazing Australian Hubert Wilkins, and it is: the simplicity of wants that gives the highest degree of happiness. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.